Russia's invasion of Ukraine has to go down as the most catastrophic failed attempt to take over another country in modern military history, and that failure is only getting worse. Something is wiping out Russian troops like never before in Ukraine, as they have experienced a hellish 3 months that have wiped out tens of thousands of soldiers. A staggering 89,000 Russian soldiers are gone, just like that, during the first quarter of 2026. And Russia is now grappling with the largest troop losses in modern history, at a time when its recruitment network is crumbling. Let's start with that headline figure, 89,000 Russian casualties in 3 months. That figure was reported by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a press conference at the end of March, and it shows us everything that is wrong with Russia's military. It means that Putin has sacrificed an average of 29,666 of Russia's people every month since the beginning of 2026. And bear in mind that January and February were still cold months. Russia's offensive actions would have slowed down during these months, only to ramp up in March as the vaunted spring offensive began. Therefore, it seems likely that the last of the 3 months is also the month when Russia experienced its highest number of confirmed casualties. What does that tell us? That it's only going to get worse from here. The most insane thing about this statistic is that it looks like it should be a record for the number of confirmed losses that Russia has suffered over a 3-month period, but somehow it isn't. Between November 2025 and January 2026, Russia's losses reached almost 100,000 as Putin's forces attempted to complete their push against Kranovsk and were left increasingly isolated in the freezing cold conditions in Ukraine, which made them easier targets for Ukraine's drones and its search and destroy squads that were formed to tackle Russia's infiltration strategy. As crazy as it sounds, this means that 89,000 confirmed losses during the first 3 months of 2026 are actually an improvement for Russia. Well, it's not much of an improvement, and the scale of these losses is being combined with another major issue for Russia, which is a warning behind the statistics we're sharing. We'll come back to that soon. First, there's a word that we've been using that is worth paying attention to. We've said confirm several times when talking about Russia's losses in 2026 so far, and that's a big clue that 89,000 casualties is likely the best-case scenario for Russia's first quarter of 2026. United 24 Media points out, as it reports that the head of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, has already pointed out that 20% of the strikes that Ukraine carried out against Russia during the first 3 months of 2026 can't be verified. This doesn't mean that Ukraine can't verify that the strikes were successful. It can. The drones it's using to make those strikes, as well as the army of reconnaissance drones that it has flying in the skies, offer all the proof needed that the hits are landing. What Ukraine can't quite verify is just how many of Russia's soldiers are being killed in these strikes. When Ukraine hits a concentration of troops with drones, it can't record all of the soldiers who get killed indirectly by shrapnel explosions. Ukraine's figures also don't include casualties that are being caused by its mid-range drone strikes, artillery attacks, and things like the number of Russians who are dying under rubble or being killed in ways that Ukraine can't confirm through direct video evidence. And here's where it gets really bad for Russia. The amount of territory that Russia has been capturing in return for this ridiculous casualty rate is declining rapidly, and it's not like Russia was doing well on that front before. If we rewind to 2025, United 24 Media reports that Putin churned through around 400,000 of Russia's soldiers in return for just 4,336 kilometers, or 1,674 miles of Ukraine. That's a return of just 0.72% of the territory of a country in which Russia still has to find a way to take the remaining 80% of free land. At this rate, it would take Russia a century to finally topple Ukraine, meaning Putin and whichever warmonger who succeeds him would be long gone before the aims of the so-called special military operation are fulfilled. But even that century of war is starting to look ambitious on Russia's end, as its rate of advance has been slowing drastically since the end of 2025. According to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, the period between October 2025 and March 26 saw Russia seize almost 1,930 kilometers, or about 745 miles of Ukraine. It's bad enough that this is drastically lower than the same period between 2024 and 25, when Russia captured about 2,716.6 kilometers, or 1,048 miles. That alone showcases the massive slowdown, but now we have an approximate figure for the number of casualties that Russia has sustained to make those paltry gains. We've shared the 89,000 and 100,000 figures already. There's some crossover here as January 2026 is included in both. If we subtract about 30,000, which is Russia's rough monthly casualty rate in 2026, from the 189,000 total we have, thus eliminating the double January issue, we get 159,000 casualties. But there's more. The ISW's figures include October 2025. United 24 Media reports that Ukraine confirmed 25,000 kills of Russian soldiers in October. That figure doesn't include casualties or unconfirmed kills, but it's the best we have, and we can add it to the 159,000 casualties to make 184,000 for the 6-month period that the ISW covers. Divide 184,000 casualties by 745 square miles gained, and Putin gets slapped in the face with a reality that he can't comprehend. Russia is losing just under 247 soldiers for every square mile of Ukraine that it gains. This is generational atrophy of an entire population for the sake of fractions of a percentage of Ukrainian territory, and it's starting to weigh very heavily on Russia's military. And somehow there is even more on the Russian casualty front. Any hope that Putin might have that the casualty rate will slow down later in 2026 is ridiculous. Russia has already launched its spring offensive, which means that more assaults are happening now than at any other point in the year, and with more assaults comes even more casualties. We've seen that already in March. On March 17th, Russia broke its record for most casualties suffered in 2026 so far, when a staggering 1,710 of its soldiers were taken out in 24 hours. Adding to that was the loss of 230 vehicles and fuel tankers, along with 29 artillery systems, and that figure alone shows a sharp increase over the 700 to 900 daily losses that Russia was incurring earlier in the year. If you want a little more context, then Russia is now losing more soldiers every 2 days than the US lost during its entire war in Afghanistan. Russia has its own Afghanistan war on its record, during which it lost 15,000 soldiers over the course of a decade, so it's losing about that much every half a month in Ukraine. This is a preposterous figure that shows how Putin, for all of his love of the Soviet era of old, can't even wage a failing war as well as the Soviet leaders who came before him, never mind a war that Russia could actually win. So Russia has 89,000 soldiers gone, eliminated, wiped off the face of the map in just the first 3 months of 2026, and the territorial gains it has been making for those massive losses are so tiny that they are barely worth talking about. Throw the start of the spring offensive into the mix and you get a powder keg of future casualties that is ready to blow up in Putin's face. But earlier we mentioned another problem that is combining with these issues to make things so much worse for Russia. This is an issue that takes things from catastrophic to war ending for Putin, as it will change everything about the future of the war. Before we dig deeper into that issue, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting value from the insight we deliver on this channel, then remember to subscribe so you don't miss a video. So the bigger issue that lurks behind Russia's casualty rate, what is it? Russia's major problem isn't that it's just losing thousands upon thousands of soldiers. That's backbreaking for the Russian military, but it's also something that's been happening for years. The real issue for Russia right now is the scale of its losses is such that it's failing to recruit enough soldiers to account for them for the first time since Putin launched his invasion. United 24 Media reports that Russia's arrivals to departures balance has been in the negative for 4 consecutive months between December 2025 and March 26. What this means is that Russia has experienced 4 months where it's losing more soldiers than it's recruiting. The same outlet adds that Russia has a target of 409,000 soldiers by the end of 2026, and it's faltering there too. After the first quarter of 2026, Russia should be 25% of the way toward hitting that target. It isn't. Russia has only managed to recruit about 80,000 new soldiers, which amounts to 22% of the target. You don't need us to tell you that 80,000 recruits is less than 89,000 casualties. However, there is a little more maths we can do here. If Russia aims to hit 409,000, then 89,000 casualties every 3 months isn't enough to cause the type of attrition that keeps Russia in the red when it comes to troop numbers. Multiply 89,000 by 4 and you get 365,000, an insane number of losses for sure, but low enough to give Russia a 50,000 plus surplus. But there are a few problems with that. The first is the 22% of the target hit when it should be 25%. That tells us that Russia isn't hitting its recruitment quotas, so 409,000 by 2026 is starting to look a little ambitious. We'll come back to that in a moment. Second problem is one that we've mentioned before. It's 89,000 confirmed casualties, not 89,000 total. That means Russia's casualty count is likely a few thousand, perhaps even tens of thousands higher than what it can verify, which suddenly means that even the target of 409,000 isn't enough. And third, Ukraine is just getting started. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has set a target of 50,000 Russian casualties per month by the end of 2026. Ambitious, yes. Ukraine is about 20,000 away from hitting that target based on his confirmed casualties, but as Russia ramps up its spring offensive, the casualty count will rise. What we're seeing now is the best that Russia can hope for in 2026, and it's still so devastating that Russia can't keep up with it via recruitment. It's becoming increasingly clear that the method that Russia has used to recruit volunteer soldiers up to this point isn't working as well as it used to. That method was simple: throw more cash at potential recruits than they've ever seen in their lives to convince them to fight and die in Ukraine. But as Russia falls behind its targets as that method fails, it's turning to more desperate approaches. Business Insider highlighted one of those approaches in an April 1st article that must have felt like a bad April Fool's joke for any Russians who somehow made it through Putin's net restrictions to read it. One governor in the Ryazan region of Russia is telling businesses that they need to help out with recruitment as the numbers plummet. Now, any firm in that region that has between 150 and 500 workers has until September to submit the names of employees that they think should be sent to the front lines in Ukraine. Companies with between 150 and 300 employees must send 2 candidates, while those between 300 and 500 must send 5 names. Any businesses that refuse to follow these rules will face a 1 million ruble fine, which works out to a little over $12,000. Russia is also taking aim at its young students as potential recruits for its military.
Also in an April 1st report, The Times says that Valery Falonov, who is Russia's education and science minister, has ordered Russia's universities to convince 2% of their students to sign up for the military. If the orders are carried out successfully, this would lead to an influx of 44,000 new soldiers, or 76,000 if Russia includes colleges alongside universities. This is stealth conscription at its most desperate. And it's not exactly very smart, is it, Putin? Russia is a country that is already dealing with a massive labor crisis brought on in part by the demands that the Kremlin has placed on the Russian people since Putin invaded Ukraine. On March 30th, United 24 Media reported that over 20 of Russia's factories in the Leningrad region alone are shifting to 3-day work weeks. And this isn't a coincidence. Work is drying up, and those companies can't maintain the number of employees that they otherwise would. Putin has created a vicious cycle inside Russia, where the available labor gets sucked up by the war machine, which ruins every other industry and places much of Russia's declining population in a position where it can't contribute to the economy in any other way than submitting to Putin's war effort. And now Russia is trying to pull employed people out of work when it doesn't have anybody to replace them, along with sacrificing the students who should be preparing to become the foundation of Russia's post-war